Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to Slumpbuster with Juju and Dre, episode 24, recording here on January 21st, 2020. On today's episode, we talk about the return of the Irishman, Super Bowl 54, and the latest in the Astros drama. Without further ado, welcome to our show.
Ladies and gentlemen, referee Herb Dean has called a stop to this contest at 40 seconds of the very first round, declaring the winner by TKO, the notorious Conor McGregor.
Right, I'm here to introduce my podcast partner, Dre, part of the best podcasting duo in the game. If anyone got something different to say about that, they can come see me. I'm right here, ATX. You can listen to me on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Store, Stitcher now too. If you got any issues with that, come listen to us. Come see us. I'm about that. Big trust. Woo woo. Juju and Dre in the flesh. Yes, sir. Like our new intro?
Oh my gosh. I just want everybody to know Juju is not hard, right? Like, he's basically a whitewashed Hispanic kid.
Hey, I figure Mark Ingram's not going to be using that for the next couple of weeks, so might as well rip that one off him. Anyway, we had a great show last week, and I think I'm ready for a few more good ones. We have a ton of great content today to sift through, including, this team right here on my hat, heading to Miami. Heading to Miami.
I know. I think it's going to be an exciting Super Bowl. So finally, right, the Patriots are not in it this year, and we finally get to see some new teams. And so I'm excited, and it feels, very exciting for these franchises, for 49ers sort of turn that corner, right, after the Colin Kaepernick era. And then the Chiefs, right, it's exciting for them to be back in the playoffs finally after so many years.
I feel as though the Patriots can live vicariously through Jimmy G, though, just like his essence, his aura just illuminating off of him. Bill Belichick's probably just clutching his pearls right now at the thought that he's in the Super Bowl. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's like okay with this because it's just like a big FU to Robert Kraft who made him trade him away.
Yeah, if you look at it, right, like that's the thing. And you can argue that part of the reason why they didn't make it to the Super Bowl this year, and there was probably a lot of issues going on with that team. The defense didn't necessarily perform their part in that Titans game. They let Derrick Henry run all over them. But still, like, part of the reason why they aren't in the Super Bowl this year, you could argue that it was Tom Brady's poor performance compared to his past years. And that's not to take away from Tom Brady being the greatest quarterback of all time. But this year, he was not the best quarterback.
It's not even about necessarily even this year. It's more so Bill's thought process for the next 10 years with Jimmy G. In his first full year as a starter, this team's in the Super Bowl, despite him only having to throw 8 times in the game. 8 times. I couldn't believe that when I read that, but then you pull up Raheem Mostert's box score, and it's like, God bless. 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. There was a couple touchdown runs where he was literally untouched. You talk about, like, making those cheeseheads into Swiss cheese, like literally just carving them up all day long. I said it. I felt as though the Niners were going to win because they were the better team, but I was not expecting them to legitimately crush this team again, blow them out for the second time this year. I thought it was going to be at least a little bit more competitive when you're talking about a Hall of Fame quarterback being on the other side. You thought that they would come in motivated with a little bit more enthusiasm, but no, they were down 27-0 at halftime.
Yeah, and I've said it before, but it's always hard to beat a team 2 times in the same season. Even if it's a team that you're much better than, there's just weird things that happen the second time around. It's a lot easier to game plan for a team that beat you than it is to game plan for a team that you already beat, right? Because if you already beat them, it's like, hey, what adjustments do we really need to make? I don't know. We sort of already beat them, right? And so the other team sort of has all of the advantage of, hey, let's look at film. Let's see what they got us on, right? Let's see where they were much better than us and see if we can make those adjustments so that we can, counteract them. But man, like the 49ers just laid it on Green Bay. And I honestly thought that the game wasn't as close as the final score was.
You mentioned that because there was garbage time points in there. It very easily, let's say the Niners just kept going kept grinding, kept coming back with the same ferocity, you could have seen them put up 50 on this team. They could have laid a 30-point cover. It didn't really even matter. You talk about like fighting when a fighter doesn't match up great stylistically. The Packers just are not a good matchup for this Niners team. There's nothing that Aaron Rodgers could do to prepare himself for that pass rush now that everyone's healthy on the defensive side of the ball. And he was pressured all day through a couple of bad interceptions, including one to end the game to Richard Sherman. And then add on to that, he has that fumble, that horrible fumble that people are looking at him weird because he just made no attempt to jump on it. I understand there's the thought process, oh, well, he's older. He's suffered a couple broken collarbones. You get hurt. But on the other hand, this is a trip to the Super Bowl that's on the line. If there's a moment to like ball up and try and jump on that ball, save your ass, that probably would have been it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. Is because it comes down to what is the heart of your players? What is the heart of your team? Do they have what it takes to make those tough plays, even if it means sacrificing their body to get them a trip to the Super Bowl? And I think if you asked all of the quarterbacks in this league, would you jump on that ball if it meant that you get a trip to the Super Bowl? Absolutely. I think every single quarterback would have done it. So then it almost makes you question Aaron Rodgers a little bit more. Is his heart and is his soul still into playing? Or does he just want to collect a paycheck, right? And be known as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to only get one ring?
Well, that was one of the big question marks when he signed his extension a couple years back that made him the highest at the time, because this is just the way it goes. At the time, the highest paid quarterback in the league. It's like, yes, you complain about not having enough pieces around you, but you're also signing this big deal when you have more than enough money that prevents the team from adding more pieces around you. There was some interesting comments that Aaron Rodgers made in post-game. He mentioned he thought this was more of a start to something great, a build towards something grander, which is something you wouldn't expect because Aaron Rodgers is starting to come towards that stretch run of his career. I think he's tailed off even more than we talked about Brady at 41. I think Brady at 41, 42, 43 looks a lot better than Aaron Rodgers does now.
Oh, yeah. And I definitely think that Aaron Rodgers, you've seen the regression this year. Like, he just only had those 2 or 3 good games where you're like, oh, yeah, this is the Aaron Rodgers that we know. And the rest of the year, he just did not look very good. And if you had him on your fantasy team like I did, right, you were very underwhelmed and disappointed with his performance. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of people that I would say like, oh, yeah, you should play that person over Aaron Rodgers. But honestly, if you played Jameis Winston over Aaron Rodgers, like, you had a better season in your fantasy. And I would almost argue that I'd be willing to take Jameis Winston, who makes poor decisions sometimes and turns the ball over, but at least he's got that fire and he's got that spark still.
Well, I don't think anyone questions that in terms of fantasy football, but in terms of just the real life game, when I ever watched Aaron Rodgers, he does not seem like that same guy. He doesn't put that like fear of God in like the opposing team that he used to. There was always that like tentative thought process that, man, Aaron Rodgers, he has 30 seconds left. Hail Mary, here we come. But now, if I apply moderate pressure to him, he's going to want to throw the ball away rather than chancing it downfield, or he's only going to target Davante Adams. And hey, Davante Adams is a great receiver to target, but back in his heyday, Aaron Rodgers was spreading the ball around to like 7 different guys. A lot of people had targets. Coming back to the fantasy thing, it was harder to pick like wide receivers off the Packers because who was going to have the good week? Was it going to be Jordy Nelson? Was it going to be Greg Jennings? Donald Driver, you know, all those guys. But now it's like, well, it's going to be Davante. And whatever you think of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Equanimous St. Brown, Geronimo Allison, Lazard, I mean, they're not great pieces, but Aaron Rodgers in his prime used to be able to elevate players like that. Used to be able to make wide receivers like a Lazard into top tier level performers, 1,000-yard performers, double-digit touchdowns. I don't think James Jones was necessarily one of the best route runners in the game or an elite wide receiver talent, but with Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball, he was consistently putting up double-digit touchdown figures.
It's just disappointing. And like I said, if you didn't see this coming, we sort of predicted it, right? And we had said that, hey, they're a paper tiger. They're probably the worst 13-3 team that we've seen in a while. And there was a lot of pressure being applied to Aaron Rodgers all season long. A lot of people were able to get to him. He was getting sacked left and right. And so now you've got the 49ers with just a big, massive D-line, a good pass rush, right? That they were able just to humiliate the Packers this game.
People are making fun of Jimmy G for only having to throw the 8 passes. But, I mean, if you're Kyle Shanahan, you're like, why should I have to throw the ball around when we're just running it down this team's throat? He said as much in his post-game press conference. Well, the run was working, so I'm not going to stop now. And I think he could carry that strategy legitimately into the Super Bowl because the Chiefs have the 26th ranked run defense in the game. And you look at guys like Mostert, by the way, cut by 6 different teams in his NFL career prior to landing with the Niners. Here's a lesson to you kids. If you're a young upstart running back in the game and the Shanahans give you a call, pick up that phone, tell your agent to sign it immediately, because they have been able to make stars at that running back position consistently for decades. And now you talk about it with Raheem Mostert. You talk about with Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman. They're just pulling smoke and mirrors to make that running back depth to like work out for them. And then they'll even throw in Deebo Samuel on a reverse, and he looks like a running back in transit. Or watch out for George Kittle coming in with those big blocks. George Kittle, I love that guy.
Oh, I know. Yeah, he's a fantastic option to have, right? And it's very difficult to find those really good, talented tight ends, but you guys have one of them on your team.
Yeah, I mean, he only had 1 catch in the game, but you can feel George Kittle's impact, just what he's doing in the run blocking, pass blocking, just being out there on the field, being a positive energy. Like, I feel like he's one of those talents that makes his teammates around him play harder, similar to, again, Garoppolo, because I do think that people are making this claim like, oh, they could have just like threw in Nick Mullins or CJ Beathard. Well, guys, let's realize that in his starting career, Jimmy G is 23-5. Without Jimmy G on the field, the Niners have won a grand total of 5 games in the last 2 years. So just perspective on what a star quarterback can do for a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we sort of talked about this last week, the game manager, right, versus the game dictator. And Jimmy G is definitely a step above game manager, right? Like there's times where he just does enough that he has just what he has to do to win the game, right, and allows his defense to hold him through. But if you need to rely on Jimmy G, he's proven that, hey, I can be that guy and I can do what we have to do to get us the win.
If you're taking out any prop bets on Super Bowl Sunday, I would not be scared to throw out a Jimmy G 300-yard performance. I think it might be a sneaky Super Bowl MVP pick if you're just thinking about making some bets aside from the game score itself. But you know what? I could talk about Niners all day. We'll talk about them more next week. We have 2 weeks to prepare for the Super Bowl. Let's talk about their opponent, because I have been high on the Chiefs all year. As you recall, even go back to the preseason, I had them 14-2. You and Aris were looking at me like, what? You have this team 14-2? What about the Patriots or the Browns are going to be something? It's like, no, guys, I think this guy named Patrick Mahomes is a elite all-star talent, and that this Chiefs team, when everyone's healthy, everyone's playing, is going to be in that top tier of the NFL. In fact, when I was ranking them consistently at the start of the season as my number 1 overall team, again, was getting pushback. Like, what about this Patriots team with the number 1 defense? It's like, no, again, this is a star-driven league, star-driven at the quarterback position, and there's no debate about it anymore. Patrick Mahomes is the most valuable talent to any NFL team. No disrespect to Lamar Jackson. He's a great performer, and he deserves the MVP this year. But I think when we talk about Patrick Mahomes for the next decade, he's not going to win a lot of MVPs because people are just going to expect it of him in the same way we always talk about how there's tier 1 of the Patriots for last decade and everyone else. It's going to be literally Patrick Mahomes and everyone else with the way this guy plays.
Yeah, and what I like about Patrick Mahomes is he's been able to be consistent or to pull himself out of ruts even in the playoffs, right? And Lamar Jackson was all the rage this year, and everybody's like, oh, look at, Lamar Jackson's starting to evolve. He can throw in the pocket, right? He can step out of the pocket and go run around, right? Uses athleticism. He had basically just as much rushing yards as some of the top running backs in the league, as well as good passing yardage. But then at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson has continued to choke when it comes to the playoffs. And now, though, right, you've got Patrick Mahomes, who, has been able to perform at this super high level throughout not only just the regular season, but the postseason as well. And he just continues to do so. And we've even talked about like, hey, sometimes you have that regression sort of in your sophomore season and you take a step back. And I haven't really seen that big of a step back from him. There was those few games where he got injured and he was maybe a little bit off of his game. But even then, he was able to bounce back fairly quickly within a few weeks and was able to keep this team going.
Well, here's the difference between Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. Patrick Mahomes looks to pass first, and if nothing's there, he'll use his legs, his athleticism to get out and run like he did this past Sunday for a 30-yard rushing touchdown. Lamar Jackson, he's going to look first to run. If nothing's there, then he'll try and throw a dink-a-dunk pass over the top and catch a safety like coming up forward into the box. So I think that's the separation of him, and kudos to Lamar for what he's been able to do as like evolve as a passer. But the point is Patrick Mahomes has everything right now. He's a great athlete. His arm talent is amazing. He just flicks the ball and it goes 80 yards downfield. There is literally any place on the field where this team can score. Doesn't matter if they're in your territory, their territory. When you have pieces like Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins is one of the slowest pieces on this team, and Sammy Watkins was a first-round pick just a few years back. Just think about that offensive weaponry that's around this guy. And I don't think it's just the weapons around him. I think Patrick Mahomes is legit elevating these players and utilizing their talents best because he also has a mad genius as his head coach in good old Andy Reid. And I know Andy Reid's legacy is definitely going to come into question because he has this reputation as a postseason joker. And we've seen this team now trailing in 2 straight games. We'll see if they can kind of keep that formula up coming against another tough Niners team, probably the best team that they've had to play in this year's postseason. It's going to be a good game. I think it's worrisome that they did trail in those games. What do you kind of think on that?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing, is that it worries me a little bit to see that they are falling behind in games, right? So they were down by 10 points, I believe was the most they're down by, but they were down by 10 points against the Titans, who have a fairly decent defense. I still think the 49ers defense is better than the Titans defense, though. They were down against Houston, right? And those games were at home. Now you're sort of on a neutral field, right? And so you've got to play a better defense that if you fall behind like they did against the Texans, right, you're down by 20-something points. Can you come back against a defense like the San Francisco 49ers, where they have, like I said, that huge defensive line? They've got a good pass rush, right? Like, you know, their corners aren't bad either. And so you've got just this really stout defense that if you fall behind by that much, as good as Pat Mahomes is and as good as able as he's been able to, you know, get past the defense of the Titans, of the Texans, the 49ers are almost in another league of defense. And I just don't think that the 49ers would allow Patrick Mahomes to come back on them if they're down by, you know, 10 plus points.
That's the thing. If you fall behind double digits or 2 scores to the Niners, then you're basically telling Nick Bosa, you're telling DeForest Buckner, you're telling Dee Ford, who was coincidentally a Chief. That's going to be a fun storyline going into the Super Bowl. Go ahead and feast. Rush the quarterback. Get at him. Make him uncomfortable. Get in his face, because when a team's down 2 scores, obviously they're going to do one thing, throw the ball. It's open season for you if you're a pass rusher. It's going to be interesting to see Andy Reid's game plan, because they're not known as a rushing team. They did use Damian Williams a little bit more in this past game, but their running game has kind of been all over the place throughout the course of the year. As you recall, they've rotated LaShawn McCoy, Damian Williams, Darnell Williams, probably another Williams with a D as his first name. You know, they have this consistent rotation, whereas, yes, you can say the Niners have had that rotation as well, but everyone that the Niners have plugged in has been able to have consistent success. This is definitely a throw-first team, and you can argue that probably the weakest part of the Niners defense is going to be their secondary, because really behind Richard Sherman, who's going to only command one side of the field, Emmanuel Mosley has been a great story, a talented, undrafted piece that's part of this defense, but he's not good enough to keep up with some of these wide receivers that the Chiefs have.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the athleticism, right, of the wide receivers that the Chiefs have. That does allow them to get back into the games a little bit easier, right, than some of these other teams. You have this great quarterback, and you got some really athletic skills players. But if they fall behind, like you said, by more than double digits, that's going to be a rough game for the Chiefs, I think.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even recommend necessarily sliding safety help towards Mosley's side, because as much as I love Richard Sherman, and we could talk about a little bit about how Darrelle Revis kind of had that shot at him this week that he's not a man-to-man corner, but he can be beat over the top. He's not exactly a spry young man anymore. And when you talk about a guy who in full sprint like a Tyreek Hill, you can beat him over the top. So you should have Jaquiski Tartt or Jimmy Ward shadowing that side of the field. I think what's going to be a big difference is because the Titans, you talk about, like, they have a good defense, but they were also only rushing 3, which is a bit of a weird strategy when you're playing a team like the Chiefs. You want to definitely put pressure on the quarterback. The Niners are going to rush 4, and they can get home with just 4. So that's going to be a big storyline of this game. I'm also looking forward from it from a point. 2018 season got ruined because Jimmy G got hurt. Where did he get hurt? In Kansas City in week 3. Storyline.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of good storylines, right? Like you said, players moving from team to team, Jimmy G getting hurt. And then also it's almost like a big contrast in styles, right? It's almost that immovable object versus the unstoppable force, right? Whereas the Chiefs offense has sort of been seen as that unstoppable force in the league, right? Of that, like we said, they could come back from even being down 20 plus points against the Texans. They could come back from being down 10 points against the Titans. So you have this unstoppable force. But then the 49ers, all year long, their defense has been that immovable object where they will hold you to whatever score that they need to hold you to just so that they can get enough points to win. And so seeing that clash of styles, I think, makes for another great storyline. I think it's going to be an exciting Super Bowl overall.
I think an X factor, though, when you mention that, is the Niners also have a top 5 offense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In addition to having that top 5 defense. So I think that's going to be the X factor. We'll see. I mean, obviously, I'm excited about it. You don't have to convince me. I already put in that time off request. There is no way that I am not going to be sitting in front of a television screen on Super Bowl Sunday. I guarantee you that. Okay. Obviously, like I said, we got 2 weeks to break down this game. Let's get into some more NFL headlines, not related to the Pro Bowl, because I will not talk about that. I would rather watch Antonio Brown's music video than watch the Pro Bowl. Speaking of Antonio,
no white women? That music video? Or which one?
Oh, they're all gems. But speaking of Antonio Brown, he's back at it again. We mentioned a little bit about his little domestic disturbance, him filming on his IG story, yelling at his baby mama, throwing a bag of dicks at her, apparently. Yeah, that's a real headline. Well, today, I don't know a lot of the details because a lot hasn't been really put out there quite yet. But there was a battery instance at his household in Florida. So just stay classy, AB. Again, here we are. It's like every day there's a story with this guy. What more can we say about him? I feel like we have to say something just because, again, another headline, another week of AB doing some crazy shit. And it's like, I don't think he's ever going to get back in the NFL. There's no one that would even consider it. In fact, his own agent, Drew Rosenhaus, left him high and dry this week. And Drew Rosenhaus has worked with some of the biggest characters in the game. And even he reached his breaking point. And of course, because AB is one to do this, he leaks their text messages between them onto his social media because he can't control himself.
We need to have, like, on our Twitter feed or something, a breaking news about Antonio Brown. Like, every time Antonio Brown does something, we got to be the first ones to break it and post it on our Twitter feed or something. Just have segments specifically designated Antonio Brown. But in all seriousness, like, I think the dude has legit just gone crazy. He's gone off the rails completely. And, I'd heard stuff about him going to counseling, and I hope he's still doing that. But this dude just needs help. And I fear for him that obviously he's not going to be making any more money from the NFL. I don't think that there's any NFL team that's willing to take a risk on him. And I don't see any agent that's willing to say, hey, I'm going to help you out, Antonio. Like, I'm going to work with you, get you back in the league. Like, if like you said, Drew Rosenhaus, if he is already saying, like, hey, I'm out, I don't want this anymore, I can't think of another agent that's willing to step in there and take his place. And so, unfortunately, I think Antonio Brown, right, just seeing how crazy he is, his sort of antics, like, there's a chance that he blows all his money here in the next few years. And it's going to be sad. He was at one point one of the most talented athletes on the face of the planet. And now he's sort of just squandered it all. And he's lost a lot of fans. People don't really like him. So I hope it all ends up for the best, but it doesn't look too great for Antonio Brown.
Well, I tell you, so Eris and I are reviewing the Aaron Hernandez documentary. It brings up some interesting insight into, like, mental illness and the effects of, like, CTE. I know that's going to be a bigger part of the story as we go into it. And just this de-evolution of Antonio Brown that's consistently happened from the point when the Steelers cut bait with him, or at least week 17 of the previous season. It's just a downward slope that it just seems like there's no trough low enough that he can sink into at this point, because we haven't even seen him elevate himself to the right place, but for a moment that, like, one couple days when he was with the Patriots where there was almost no headlines, and then suddenly, the rational thinker he is, he's texting the woman that's accusing him of horrible acts, and it's just like, dude, why? Why? How comfortable do you think Drew Rosenhaus is sleeping at night knowing that he still doesn't have to deal with Antonio Brown anymore?
Oh, I mean,
he can set his phone down in peace and not expect to hear it go off at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. or name an hour in the day.
Oh, I'm sure it's a huge weight that's lifted off his shoulders. And I mean, why would you go through all of that effort for a dude that I think Drew Rosenhaus knows that, hey, this guy's never going to be in the NFL again. And if he's not back in the NFL, Drew Rosenhaus doesn't get paid. So he had all this stress for a player that's never going to play in the league again, right? So that means there's no paycheck for him. And the other thing is like sponsorships, right? We know that athletes either get paid via their sport or they get paid via sponsorships. And who's really looking to do a video with Antonio Brown anymore? Like, what company is looking to do a commercial with Antonio Brown? Mm-hmm. Probably not any, right? So it's like there's no more profit there. There's no more money. Like Drew Rosenhaus, I'm sure, is sleeping just pretty.
He's still got that Logan Paul fight, I guess. That's probably going to happen.
That'll be the only way that Antonio Brown can make any more money off his likeness and image, I'm sure.
Would you watch it? If I told you the option to buy it on pay-per-view was there, would you spend money?
How much money are we talking? I'm not doing a $65 pay-per-view like a UFC fight.
Okay, let's say like a Golden Boy type fight. Was that like $25?
It's enough of a freak show that I would be intrigued by that.
Okay. I mean, Logan Paul is actually no joke. I know we make fun of him because he's a YouTuber that just happens to box on his spare time, but I think it's not impossible for us to see him knock Antonio Brown out. I kind of wonder, would that do more damage or would that set him right? Is it just kind of like a balancing out effect, like Fontaze perfect, and then like Logan Paul knocks him straight?
Maybe it has to be the other side of his chin that gets knocked out, right? Like, so Montez Perfect, I think, hit him on the left side of his chin, or maybe it's the right. I don't remember. But Logan Paul will have to hit him from the other side. And maybe that, jiggle things back into place. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of also kind of mental illness, I do kind of want to just touch on a light story that came up this week. Deontay West, former NBA player, played with some LeBron James, Cavs teams, and a couple other franchises over the years. He, a video came out this week of him just in some kind of disturbance on the freeway. He was just getting physically assaulted, and it was ugly, man. I know you haven't seen the video yet. We talked about that, but anytime you just see like a human just getting literally stomped on his head by another person, another individual, it's so disappointing that like no one could put their phone away and step in or ensure that individual who was responsible for this couldn't come to it. I don't know what incited the issue. I know West says that it was a matter of a gun being involved, but then when he's getting interviewed by police on the side, he's just speaking gibberish. He's not coherent in any way. I don't know, man. It was disturbing. I just want to say I hope Deontay West gets some help. Wish that like anyone who knows him can really step up for him and kind of like ensure that he receives that. And I know even LeBron James, despite their kind of issues they've had when LeBron was a younger guy, and obviously, I mean, it was notorious in the mid 2000s. One of LeBron's teammates is dating his mom, but even he's stepping up to try and like make sure Deontay West is taken care of. So that kind of tells you there is some faith in humanity out there. Now, there really wasn't much faith in humanity for the Lakers to overcome that deficit against the Celtics, though, the other night. Was there?
I was wondering how you were going to transition this into the show. And so now you had to get me all depressed talking about CTE with Antonio Brown and Deontay West. And now you're going to throw this in here. All I want to say is, so 100% props to the Celtics. I think the Lakers needed that butt whooping. Here's what I will say. And this sort of, I think, justifies the Lakers' stance when it comes to not doing the load management thing, is because the season is a long season. You're going to get fatigued at some point, and I think the Lakers just looked really fatigued. And I'm not taking away from the Celtics win. Like, you guys looked very good. The Celtics just shots started falling. Like, there were some dudes that were hitting shots from almost like half court. And at that point, I just knew, I was like, okay, this is going to be that type of game. The Lakers are not ever going to be in it, right? And they never were. But this is, like I said, going back to the whole load management thing, I'm glad that the Lakers have built such a big cushion to secure that one seed in the West, that even if we have games like this where we look like absolute crap, right? Because we still have a little bit of leeway. Whereas had we taken the approach of load management and we're like, hey, we're not going to have LeBron and AD all the time, and they're going to sit random games, we wouldn't have that cushion to have games like this. That being said, I cannot wait for the All-Star break. My team just looked absolutely exhausted, and your team looked like the young, energetic team that they are.
I'm going to get a T-shirt with Jaylen Brown dunking on LeBron, and on the back of the T-shirt is going to be Jason Tatum dunking on LeBron, and looking forward to this year's finals. See you there.
No, I hope so. A Lakers and Celtics finals. Oh my gosh, I would love it. And just so you know, Juju, we're going. I'm buying tickets. I don't care how expensive they are. They'll probably be like $3,000 for the nosebleeds, but still.
Just a little bit. I was looking at the Super Bowl prices. I think the minimum ticket was $5,000. So,
Oof.
yeah, got to put down a small loan, donate a few organs to get those seats, right?
Oh yeah.
Just, the non-essentials, a kidney, half a liver. Do you really need your spleen?
Honestly, you could even live with one testicle.
Yeah, man. Well, at least the Super Bowl is one championship, one title game in sports that won't fall under serious question, at least this year in particular, much like titles that have been won the last couple years in the MLB, because this is a story that just keeps on giving, man. I thought that we were already coming towards the end of it when we saw the punishments were listed out there, that everyone that had been fired that needed to go was gone. We did have our questions. What was going to happen to the players? Would there be any more punishment for Alex Cora? But then scorched earth just happened this week because we have 3 managerial openings now because we knew that AJ Hinch had been fired from the Houston Astros. We knew that Alex Cora was gone from the Red Sox, but Carlos Beltran, the New York Mets manager that they just hired this past offseason, he's gone. We have 3 weeks until spring training, so huge fallout for a bunch of organizations besides the Astros just happened. And now we have this random Twitter account that popped up that's claiming to be Carlos Beltran's niece. And she made the bold claim that Jose Altuve, and it's funny because I listened back to last week's show, Jose Altuve, who I mentioned that I didn't want to disparage his legacy. I didn't want to implicate him if he wasn't involved. Well, he got implicated.
And he may be the worst of the offenders, in fact. So not just implicated, one of the worst.
She said that he may have been wearing a buzzer underneath his clothes that would aid him in being able to know what the pitches were, and not the 2017 season, but the most recent Astros season, the 2019 season. And you can probably only assume further games in between, not just limited to those 2 years in particular, if a player is seriously going to such length. But that really caused a storm because there's these videos that come out of Jose Altuve insisting, please don't tear off my shirt, as he hit that famous home run off of Aroldis Chapman to propel the Astros into this latest World Series. There's this kind of like weird bulge that if you look at the right frame, you can kind of see. That one's a little bit more questionable, but it just adds up into I think there's a part of us that's ready to believe anything with the story now because it's just gone to a point where just more and more stuff is coming out. In fact, if you just want to go full conspiracy theorist with this, there's even thought process that this Twitter account has been really positive about a certain Justin Verlander as opposed to the rest of the team. I mean, there was already that suspicion that this didn't seem like Carlos Beltran's niece. This seemed like a player. This seemed like someone going full Kevin Durant burner account, and here we are. Initial thoughts?
Yeah, well, I want to give my initial thoughts when it comes to the niece that we're talking about and just give a little bit of background. So some of the background on this niece's account is the so-and-so, whoever the person is, has been leaking some information, right? So not only information in regards to this cheating scandal, but some of the other information in regards to the team, even before some of the MLB insiders have been able to leak it, right? So you have all of your journalists and, people on ESPN, people on, Fox Sports that have sort of insider connections into these organizations. And this random Twitter account, right, from Carlos Beltran's niece has been able to get that information before even some of those sources, right, the ESPNs, like I said, and the Fox Sports, right, the major networks. And they've been posting this stuff, a few hours to even a few days before the major story breaks. Then the other thing that makes it a little bit suspicious, a little bit weird, is the Beltran family has come out and said, hey, nobody knows who this girl is, right? So it's allegedly Carlos Beltran's niece, but the family has come out and said, no, we don't know. We don't have any nieces or anybody in the fam of that name, right, or that's related to us. And so therefore, I think that leaves it as it's probably somebody within the organization that, is coming out and saying these things. Now, I do wonder about what the motivation is, right? Is the motivation, if it is Verlander, is the motivation, hey, I'm going to make myself look good and be the good guy in this situation when everybody else is sort of, the sinners and the demons amongst the organization? Or is it just somebody that felt, that moral apprehension and was like, hey, I just don't don't feel good about this. I don't feel good about the cheating that's going on in this organization. And I want to do something about it without there being a bunch of backlash, right? Like, obviously it'd be like a workplace sort of ethics issue, is you're not just going to go straight to your manager and say like, hey, here's the issue, right? You normally will go to an HR. This is sort of a way to stay a little bit hidden, stay under the covers, yet still be able to air your grievances.
Well, I mean, if this is, because it's just allegations, Justin Verlander per se, you don't obviously want the Astros to lose this world title or for this world title mean anything less, because from a pitcher standpoint, you weren't benefiting from this sign stealing. You were just going out there dominating, throwing the best game you could. And if your hitters managed to put up enough runs for you to win that game, that was great. And for Justin Verlander, this would have been his only world championship in his career. As we mentioned before on previous shows, he hasn't had a win in a World Series game in terms of his actual win-loss record statistically. So, a big part of like his Hall of Fame bid, which, is very important to a player, very important to a player's legacy. I kind of understand the human element of that if you were from a perspective where you didn't honestly know. But obviously our big thing on this is, how do you not know? How does any player in that locker room have not known what was going on? Because the player that outed this whole scandal was a pitcher himself, Mike Fiers, who was on that staff. And speaking of Mike Fiers, Jessica Mendoza, who is a analyst for ESPN, former softball player, does a little bit of work with the Mets, and why she's in the headlines because she was brought on to talk about the Carlos Beltran firing. She needs to learn kind of like more or less about this whistleblower thing. Mike Fiers, you got to give the guy credit for stepping out into the public. We talk about the sketchy Twitter account that's come out and it potentially being a player. Well, Mike Fiers said, screw that. I'm just going to come out there and I'm going to be honest and open to not allow this scandal to go any further, because I don't understand what Jessica was thinking. Because first off, if this wasn't brought out there to the public, this could still be going on. It could be going on for decades even. It could only be getting worse, because we're talking about buzzers now. What are we going to be talking about later on? What's next in this whole thing if this doesn't get put out like it's about to? Because Rob Manfred already came down hard on the Astros. What's next for the Red Sox? If Beltran didn't get let go, would we been talking about the Mets in a couple of years, questioning their World Series? What would have been next if Mike Fiers wasn't brave enough to actually step out in the public, say what he had to say, and let that be his piece?
Yeah, and I always feel bad when people shame whistleblowers, right? Because even if, let's say, the whistleblower was incorrect, or, the league was able to find that, hey, there was really no wrongdoing or anything like that, or we don't think that it was severe enough to warrant any punishment, something like that. There's a reason why we need to protect whistleblowers, and we should have their back. And it's in order to keep the integrity of the game, of the workplace, right, of the government. And, like you said, Mike Fiers, like, I commend him. I know that it's hard to come out, but him being able to say that, like, has led to us discovering just how rampant sort of this cheating is amongst the league. And, I think he should in some ways be honored for that. So I'm grateful for it. I do agree that, had we not stopped them now, right, and had the league not handed out such harsh punishments, this definitely could have been an even bigger issue.
And it's like, because she works for the Mets, it's even a bigger gray area, because it's like, okay, so you just wanted Carlos Beltran to just be fine, your manager, and who knows, for this to be implemented in your game. And she's a former player too, as a softball player. So it's like, come on, this is all about sportsmanship, right? We can't allow this to continue further. There's a lot of stuff going on with this story. I mean, it's been a great story to talk about. I mean, we're talking about baseball just a few months before the season, which is more than baseball's had the luxury of being spoken about when it's not the playoffs or not the All-Star game in recent years. Obviously, we're talking about it for the wrong reasons, but there's a lot of fallout. And one of the bigger questions, too, is just going to be in regards to the players. Again, we were shocked that there was no player suspensions, that there were no player fines. Part of the issue is it's kind of tough, because we mentioned baseball salaries are not equal. Do you charge them at what their rookie salaries were in that given year or at that time, or how involved they were? Do you find them based on that? And when we look back at this like scandal, the MLB definitely gave immunity to some of these players for even coming up and talking to them in the investigation. Now we have questions of, okay, they were immune from the initial sign stealing scandal, but if this buzzer thing starts to take off more, do you still grant them that same immunity?
So I wouldn't, because then that's the players directly knowing, directly being involved, right? Even beyond just the banging of the trash can. Like that means that the player themselves was okay with actually strapping a device to their shoulder, right? Or wherever it might have been housed, their stomach, their hip, whatever. As far as we know, it's the shoulder. So that means they would have had to have been okay, and they would have had to have 100% knowledge, and they would have had to have consented to having this device put on their shoulder. And that to me tells me like, hey, you're directly involved in that cheating scandal, right? Whereas with some of the players, they might not have been the ones to directly say that, hey, we need to bang on trash cans so you could tell us what type of pitch is coming, right? They could have just said, hey, we'll go along with it, right? But it could have been the general manager's plan. But now they're actually being the ones to carry this out. They're the ones having something attached to their body. The other thing, though, is I don't know if all of the players knew about it, right? So Altuve basically ran off the field, right? And he was saying like, hey, don't rip off my shirt, don't rip off my shirt. So that to me tells me that maybe it's not every single player on the team that was a part of this half of the scandal, right? I think every player on the team probably knew about the banging on the trash can, just because you're going to know those things, right? And you're going to hear the manager or whoever it is banging on that trash can. Whereas Altuve saying, hey, don't rip off my shirt, don't rip off my shirt. That to me tells me there's probably a lot of guys that were like, why wouldn't you let us rip off your shirt? Like that's what everybody does, right? Mm-hmm. So they probably didn't know about it. And if that's the case, it's a lot easier to punish the one or two players that were in the know than it is to punish everybody.
Well, he came up with two excuses in that instance. He said, one, I'm shy. Two, my wife didn't like it, like when it happened in a previous game or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And there was an interesting video that came out recently that was kind of like more or less an anatomy of a liar. If you question someone directly, like ask them how they knew like when something was happening, because I believe the reporter had asked him like, how did he know to expect that pitch or something like that? And he like laughed it off and then brought up something unrelated, which, mm-hmm. you know, it's a pseudoscience, being able to analyze if someone's really lying in a mm-hmm. particular moment. I mean, certainly there's been trained professionals for years who have taken on that task, but it's really hard to believe anything really coming from any player at this particular instance. And it's disappointing because, again, Jose Altuve, he has been great for the game. This plucky 5'6" second baseman who was thought to be just like a bat boy at like a Astros tryout and told to go home, suddenly is one of the biggest stars in the game. And now he's just coming under fire too from not just analysts or people that are talking about it, but other players are criticizing him because Aroldis Chapman, who he hit the home run off of, tweeted at him with a picture of, you know, you've seen the Michael Jackson gif of him eating popcorn, and mm-hmm. then CC Sabathia not CC Sabathia. I think it was either CC or David Ortiz tweeted at him a picture of him having to walk through one of those airport security metal detectors on his way to the plate. So he's just getting dragged right now, and it really takes away from what could have potentially been a Hall of Fame legacy. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, mm-hmm. the MLB Baseball Writers Association had their annual vote to determine this year's Hall of Fame class. Now, first off, congratulations to Derek Jeter, mm-hmm. Larry Walker. You guys both deserved it. If you're unfamiliar with kind of more or less the process of how the Major League Baseball voting kind of like takes place, so basically for a player to be voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, they need to have a 75% vote. They need to have played in the MLB for 10 seasons, and 5 seasons after retirement, they become eligible. Once they're mm-hmm. on the ballot, they have 10 years of eligibility to receive that 75% threshold. Now, we have a couple interesting names who have been close, well, relatively close, who have been on the ballot for a few years. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. So both these guys in this year's voting received Roger Clemens 61% and Barry Bonds 60.7% of the vote respectively. Now, here's what I got to say, Baseball Writers Association. It's like one of the biggest hypocritical associations in all of sports because mm-hmm. they're not voting on these guys because obviously PEDs. But what I'll say about this, you know, when these guys were making their most money, writing about these guys in the PED era, mm-hmm. writing about these guys when they were just hitting bombs into the bay each and every night. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, all these guys. And it's so disappointing. They would have been Hall of Famers with or without the roids. It was a product of the era that they played in. But now we're here that your all-time home run leader legitimately has a chance of not making it into the Hall of Fame with 2 years left of eligibility. What do you think? what's your thoughts? I mean, I know you had mentioned in the past with when we talked about like John Bodone's legacy, the PED should just be an automatic disqualifier. Doesn't matter the context, doesn't matter circumstances. If you got popped with it, you're done. But these guys were generational talents, arguably some of the best players to ever play the game. Again, with or without the roids. It was just a matter of, in the steroid era, legitimately, almost everyone was doing it. Like when you watched, bring up like the Mitchell report, when this first went through Congress, the list of players that were found to be on that client list that were receiving steroids was scathing. For every pitcher or batter that was caught doing it, there was at least 5 or 10 more in AAA ball that were doing it as well. So, I mean, in terms of the era, I think steroids, if anything, just elevated the talent of like the legitimate stars like a Barry Bonds and a Roger Clemens.
Yeah, but I still feel that it's an unfair comparison to some of the other people that are being voted into the Hall of Fame, right? Because if you were able to perform without cheating, right, and without the steroids, you know, what would Barry Bonds have been like had he not ever done that, right? And so he has sort of a step above everybody else just because he had the ability to take steroids. And therefore, like, I just don't think that it's a fair comparison with everybody else in the Hall of Fame. The other issue is because of all the cheating scandals with baseball, I think it just looks bad to elect right now somebody into the Hall of Fame that even is tied to another type of scandal, right? Like, you already have to try to fight to show baseball's sort of legitimacy as a sport and to show that, hey, this is not a rigged game, right? Like, we do deserve people to gamble and put money on these games, right? Like, it's not rigged in any way. It is fair. And now you're already going through, well, you know, we have people banging on trash cans, people using buzzers. And what happens when you elect somebody that took steroids into the Hall of Fame? Like, what is sort of that image? You're basically saying it's okay to cheat and we're going to elect you into the Hall of Fame.
Well, you have active players right now, active pitchers. They're putting out statements. I'd rather play a steroid guy than play someone that knows my signs.
Yeah.
Because baseball is all built on the fact, can you hit that ball? And knowing a fastball is coming or knowing a curveball is coming is more of an advantage than being able to just try and make contact and have another extra 10% of power on that swing. And when you talk about someone with such great eye-hand coordination, someone with a phenomenal swing like a Barry Bonds, yes, it made him into the player that would eventually hit a record-breaking 762 home runs. But even without that, Barry Bonds was easily going to clear 600 home runs without a question. It was easily going to be close to a 3,000 hit guy, all the RBIs, everything. I mean, there was literally a whole season where statistically, if Barry Bonds didn't even swing a bat, he would have still had like a 400 on base percentage because pitchers were so scared to pitch to him that they would walk him every time. In San Francisco, they had a wall of rubber chickens that they would hang up every time someone intentionally walked Barry Bonds, because let's look at some Barry Bonds stats. Let's pull up the amount of intentional walks that guy received in the peak of his powers. For starters, his highest walk total was an astounding 198 in 2002. That is almost 200 times that he wasn't even able to swing a bat. Could you imagine, like, is it not cheating to take away this guy's ability to swing a bat?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I still think that is cheating though. Like, the fact that you had to use a performance enhancing drug, right? Even if you are extremely talented, the fact that you had to enhance your performance in some way, to me, that takes away from your legacy. And if you put somebody in the Hall of Fame that has even the slightest bit of cheating, where do you draw the line, right? Do you say, well, he was cheating, but everybody else was cheating, so it makes it okay? Well, that sort of turns into a slippery slope of, well, you know, they were stealing signs, but everybody was stealing signs, you know, in 2020, right? So we should allow those people, right? Well, Jose Altuve, he had a buzzer, right, that was on his shoulder, but there's people banging trash cans. So we should still allow him into the Hall of Fame.
I mean, we're talking about which scandal was worse consistently. How we even had Pete Rose throwing in his input into the debate and saying, hey, you know, what I did wasn't as bad as what these guys are doing. So I get that. It's tough to compare, like, what was worse? What was the better of two evils? But, I mean, when we're talking about, because everyone on the ballot, everyone we're talking about has potential questions about their ties to PEDs, except maybe like a Derek Jeter, who was more of a line-to-line hitter versus a power hitter. Larry Walker had the benefit of being more of a five-tool player in his, like, heyday. But even still, like, the majority of players that are coming up in this era were tied to it. So when it's just a matter of, is it just we don't like these guys? Is it because they were so phenomenal above everyone else that we have to dock them even more?
I mean, I think that could be a part of it. Like I said, for me, I just personally think that it's like, hey, if there's even a little bit of evil, right? And I say evil as in like there was some type of scandal, not like the person is actually an evil human being, right? But then that means you got to squelch all of it, because if you let a little bit in, then that means you got to let a lot in. And then there's no way to stop it. There's no way to turn it off. And so that's why I think, some of it is maybe that, hey, these guys were just so dominant, so we got to find an excuse to reason why they were so dominant and why they were so good at the sport. And PEDs is an easy way to say that, even though we know like what the stats say. We know how hard it is to be able to hit a baseball consistently when it's being thrown, at 85, 90 plus, miles per hour. But still, I'm fine with Barry Bonds not being in the Hall of Fame.
I'm not, and I'll admit I have bias as a Giants fan, sure, but I think it's just a stain just in terms of being from a baseball perspective, to not have someone who was legitimately carrying the sport from a rating standpoint, from an entertainment standpoint in your Hall of Fame. Like I said, everyone who's voting on this, everyone from the Baseball Writers Association of America benefited from these guys, their blood, sweat, and tears, and maybe even some tainted blood in their heyday. So like, if you're going to accept their money, if you're going to accept those paychecks, and then when it comes time to pay up, I think there is a little bit of questions there. Another notable person who's also on their 8th year in the ballot is going to be Curt Schillings. Curt Schillings is less of a steroids holdout, but more of someone who's getting targeted more so for his recent outbursts of political beliefs. I think it's a little unfair that he's still clinging on to this potential eligibility. He's at 70% though. When you look at Clemens and Bonds, 61%, 60.7, 2 years to go. I don't know if they're going to be able to pull through. It's hard to make that leap, especially when you have new people coming on the ballot each and every year. And baseball at most averages maybe 3 people getting into the Hall of Fame in a given year.
Yeah. And like I said, with the cheating scandals that are going on right now, I think it's just a bad look if you have somebody even remotely tied to another cheating scandal, right? Is that there's so many spotlights sort of on Major League Baseball right now as it is, that the writers almost can't afford to make a mistake and choose somebody that's been implicated in a cheating scandal.
All right. Well, we'll move off of baseball. We'll move into some Aundre Huynh territory as the Irishman is back. Conor McGregor, with a fury of shoulder strikes, managed to get the big knockout win against Donald Cowboy Cerrone in 40 seconds, which means you said you spent close to $70 on this pay-per-view?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It basically was $70. After tax, it came out to be about $70.
So $70 for 40 seconds of a fight. I don't have a calculator right next to me, but basically the return on investment isn't exactly ideal.
No, it's like I paid a full Kirk Cousins, basically.
You paid a full Kirk Cousins on that.
That is how much I spent on that pay-per-view, is basically buying a Kirk Cousins worth of talent.
But you got to give it to Conor. He looked good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this was the perfect sort of comeback fight for him, right? And I was a little bit worried. You and I, we had talked, and I had chosen every other fight correctly except for this one, but this one just happened to be the perfect fight for Conor. He came back. He looked healthy. He looked focused. He looked athletic. He looked explosive. And this has by far been his best finish. I would even argue that it was a better finish than his Jose Aldo fight. With the Jose Aldo fight, it sort of just came out, landed a good, I can't remember if it was a kick or a punch, but it was a good strike right on the button. Jose Aldo was out just right away, right? Didn't even get a chance to strike back. This one, he was just so dominant that Cowboy tried to strike back, and I think only landed one other good hit. And I think it was like one sort of semi-head kick that sort of got blocked. But this was the exact fight that Conor wanted coming back. Like, this is exactly how it had to go for him to be successful.
Yeah, it's like even hard to break down that fight because there wasn't enough of it to really break down. Okay, so like you talk about like Cowboy strategy. We mentioned, why are you trying to stand and bang with this guy? Like, it does not make sense from a stylistic standpoint. What we know about Conor, what we know about you, use your grappling, because that's going to be your main source of advantage in this fight, being able to wear him down, especially because you're the bigger guy coming into the fight. But no, I mean, you mentioned it in our pre-show, like really all he had was one attempted head kick, and that was really all she wrote. I mean, I keep going back to the shoulder strikes, man. Like, I've never seen that in a fight before. Do you think that's something he planned, or do you think he was just improvising on the spot?
No, I think some of it was just improvisation, right? And Conor really is, as much crap as I give him, right? I'm not the biggest Conor McGregor fan. I just don't like the way that he acts. But I got to give it to him when he strikes on his feet. He's a very creative striker. He mixes in a lot of different styles between boxing, kickboxing, capoeira even, right? So which is sort of a dancing martial arts from Brazil. And I think he just felt that, hey, his head is sort of lowered and I need to maximize my time, right? That I've already sort of got him dazed. And if I'm sitting here in a clinch where I'm not striking his head, that's every single second that passes, he's going to possibly be able to recover. So I need to keep doing something to keep him dazed, to keep at least jiggling his brain, for a lack of a better term. I got to do something to continue to jiggle that brain in there, right? Even while he's already dazed. And so I think Conor just sort of said, hey, I've got my shoulder. I'm a little bit loose on that side, even though I'm clinched enough that I can't pull like my wrist out completely to throw a good punch. I can use my shoulder to continually strike the jawline and to continue to keep Cowboy basically from being able to gather himself and be able to gather his thoughts. And it was just enough to continue to keep Cowboy dazed.
I mean, he broke his nose. He hit him with the hard part of the shoulder and broke his nose. I mean, it was one of the most creative, innovative things I've seen in a fight. And he earned this win. It was a must win for Conor because, again, I keep going back to, I thought if he loses, this is a retirement fight. Screw all the 5 fights he's talking about. This is over. You can't recover from a 3-fight losing streak, can you? But no, he said, enough of those questions. I'm going to win. I'm going to point at Jorge Masvidal, who's sitting ringside, and say, you're next.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Is that had Conor McGregor lost this fight, I think what fight do you make after that? Because Cowboy, really, as much respect as Cowboy has, you and I, we've sort of talked about it. He had been finished in what's now been 3 of his last 3 fights, but 2 of his last 2 fights going into this. So he's on a 2-fight losing streak, both finishes going into the McGregor fight. But had he, coming off of that 2-fight losing streak, been able to finish McGregor or been able to even beat McGregor, right? Even if he didn't finish him, even if it was a decision, had he been able to do that, I think the sort of mystique of Conor McGregor and sort of this name brand that Conor McGregor has built up, I think a lot of people would have said, hey, what really is that brand? It's a guy that never defended a title, went on a 3-fight losing streak, came back, and then got beat by a gatekeeper that had been finished the 2 times right before him. And so I think Conor would have lost a lot of fans. The UFC would have lost a lot of their reputation, right, in backing Conor McGregor as their sort of face of the franchise. And hey, this dude can't even fight. He can't even keep up with one of the old guys that has 50 fights in the UFC,
Yeah, I mean, it was an important thing for not just Conor, but for the UFC business as a whole, because now the options are endless. You have Conor, who's a guy who's unique because you can put him in 3 different weight classes and you look at potential fights. First off, Aundre, which one do you want? Because we're talking about Gaethje, we're talking about Masvidal, we're talking about Usman, Covington. I mean, I just want to see that presser between him and Covington if that fight ever came to be. Then let's see here. What else do we got? We have Khabib 2, Diaz 3. 2 boxing matches potentially between Mayweather again and, Pacquiao, but I'm going to focus on the UFC side. I'm going to focus in the octagon. What do you personally want to see, Aundre, and what will happen?
Okay, so here's my guess. I know Dana White has come out and said, the Khabib rematch is definitely happening. The Khabib rematch is happening. I do not think that that's a wise way to go because at the end of the day, I still think that Conor McGregor's main weakness is going to be exactly what we've said that it is, and it's going to be on the ground, right? And Khabib is just too good of a wrestler that Khabib took the risk and sort of stood with Conor last time and was able to knock Conor down even. But I think this time, seeing how big and strong McGregor is, I think Khabib is just going to say, nope, I'm just going to take him to the ground right away and just whoop him, right? So I don't think the Khabib fight is the way to go. What I do think would be the better way to go, and as much as maybe not a moneymaker as this fight would be, right? So I think McGregor would make a lot of money possibly fighting an Usman or a Covington. He'd make a lot of money fighting a Street Jesus, Jorge Masvidal. This fight wouldn't make as much money, but I think it would make a lot of sense for Conor and would get him probably a good win is Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje is a good wrestler, but he doesn't use his wrestling when he fights. He sort of just stands up and bangs. And Gaethje's taken a lot of hits in the past. He's even been knocked out, I think, in the UFC as of recently, or TKO'd, I should say. And so I think Gaethje would be one of those fighters that has enough pride, or is so prideful in a sense, that he would be willing to stand with McGregor. But McGregor now would look like he's the bigger guy and might be able to knock Gaethje out and still keep his fans, still get a really impressive win, and be able to say, like, hey, look, I just picked off another one of the top dudes at lightweight.
Yeah, I mean, the tough thing is, Dana definitely wants to put Conor back into the main event picture, put him back with a title shot potentially.
Mm-hmm.
But it's which title do you send him after?
Yeah, I definitely would say I'd rather him fight the winner of Khabib versus Ferguson if I'm trying to shoehorn him into a title shot. And my main reasoning being, if Ferguson wins, Ferguson is a little bit older. Ferguson does not quite have the wrestling takedowns, and it would still be a really good fight. So Ferguson is a good wrestler, without a doubt. He's very good on the ground, and I still think he's a very dangerous matchup for Conor, but it's slightly easier matchup than Khabib is. Then when it comes to Usman and Covington, those two dudes are all-American wrestlers in college, right? I don't know if Covington was, but he was still a D1 wrestler. Usman was an all-American in D2 wrestling. And so those two guys, I would not want Conor fighting either of those two. Like, that is Conor's Achilles heel, is fighting wrestlers. Those two guys would easily be able to take him down, and I don't think that he could get away. And they're the bigger, stronger fighters. As big and as strong as McGregor looked, we still don't know what his gas tank is. We know that Covington and we know that Usman can go 5 rounds. We saw it in their last fight, right? And it happened to be ended just because Covington's jaw was broken, and we know that he was hurt. But it probably would have gone all the way to decision had that not been the case. I don't think that Conor McGregor can yet go that far. I don't think he can go a full 5-round fight with some of those monsters at 170.
He's definitely attributing his now sober lifestyle for a better cardio, better endurance. He was prepared for this fight with Cowboy to go a few rounds. Mm-hmm. It just, at the end of the day, his talent just shined through and he was able to pick up a big win. And we did question, Cowboy, like you mentioned, he's been finishing his last couple fights. I think the more and more a fighter gets knocked out, it just becomes time and it becomes easier to knock them out. I think Cowboy's at that point. I don't know what his next fight is, but I wouldn't be surprised if you told me he went down again in an early round, just given what we're seeing if he has to face another talented striker like McGregor. Going back to Conor, though, just from a marketing standpoint, the fights with, like I mentioned, Masvidal, that's what people want to see.
Yeah.
That's the hottest fight right now. Mm-hmm. I know Conor wants that Khabib rematch, but another facet to that is he would have to go down to Khabib. Khabib's not going to go up for him. Khabib doesn't want to do anything for him. Khabib wanted to kill him the last time those two were in an octagon.
And he almost did.
So he's not going to give any breaks or any kind of meet in the middle moments for Conor if those two line up again. It would be an exciting fight from the standpoint of being able to hype up the fact there was a brawl in the stands the last time those two went toe to toe. But I don't need to see that fight right now. I need to see him versus Masvidal because it's something new. It's something exciting. Yeah. I don't know if they're going to bring back the BMF title, but I would rather have a 5-round gritty BMF fight that's not a real title, but his kind of a title. Then, obviously the introduction to that bout was Nate Diaz losing in an early round, which no one wanted to see because of that stoppage.
Yeah. And part of the issue with that, so I definitely agree that Masvidal is the fight to make. I think that's the one everybody wants to see, right? But we saw that Diaz sort of got handled by Masvidal, and that makes me a little bit worried for McGregor taking on this fight. And I know that styles make, matchups, right? And so even though Masvidal was able to own Diaz, right, and Diaz was able to beat McGregor, it does not necessarily mean that Masvidal is going to be able to own McGregor. That being said, I still think Masvidal is probably the slightly better fighter, also probably the slightly bigger of the fighters. So I would just be really intrigued. You're right. That's the number one fight that I want to see. So as much as I said Gaethje is the wise move for McGregor probably to make, right, I think that would be an easier win. I think the Masvidal fight brings in the most money for the UFC. You can make it for that BMF title, and it's just going to be one heck of a fight. And it's going to be all stand-up. You don't have to really worry about, is Masvidal going to take him down to the ground like Khabib and just hold him on the ground for 3 rounds or 5 rounds even. It's going to be like, hey, somebody's going to basically walk out of the cage with a broken nose, a broken jaw, and somebody's going to be knocked out basically at the end of the fight.
I wonder how the build-up to that fight would go, because the big story of the press conference, the lead up to the Cerrone fight, was Conor being respectful, him being nice, him hugging Cowboy's grandma in the middle of the octagon. But now it's like, I got that W. I got that win under my belt, and I'm fighting a guy who's been talking a lot of trash over the last year. You think old Conor comes out to play?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Dana White would definitely encourage it. The most, I think, trash talk and the best build-up to a fight would either be Jorge Masvidal, because Masvidal will say whatever the heck he wants to say. Like, he's from the hood, and he's one of the baddest dudes on the face of the planet. So he'll say whatever he wants. We know that Conor will say whatever he wants. And then Colby Covington. Colby Covington is also a master at just making up stupid crap and saying it, and he's not afraid to say whatever he wants. So those two fights, I think, are the most marketable, just from a pure marketing campaign, right? Like, it writes itself. I'm excited. As much as I dislike Conor McGregor, the UFC is better when Conor McGregor is good and not just getting torched by a Khabib, right? Or a Nate Diaz. Like, it is better for the UFC when he is good. Just like the NBA is better when it's the Celtics and the Lakers are good. Just like the NFL is better when the Patriots are good. Like, it just gets people watching. As much as we hate those franchises, as much as, we hate some of these fighters, everybody will watch a Conor McGregor fight, especially if it's against a Jorge Masvidal or a Colby Covington, against these big names.
It was certainly a spectacle in Vegas. I think we got to wrap up this show, but just a couple headlines here. So what'd you think of the new setup they're going to have in Vegas for the draft? On the Bellagio with boats driving out the draft picks to the stage. Vegas, very, gotta be very bougie about it.
Yeah.
Really emphasize the show part of it. I think the NFL made the widest decision in going to Vegas, didn't they?
Oh yeah, I definitely think that they did, right? We know that the Raiders' new stadium is going to be open soon. You're going to have a whole lot of NFL fans in that city, right? Whether they're Raiders fans moving to Vegas or they're people that want to come watch their team, right? Like, that's going to be one of those stadiums, whether or not the Raiders are good or bad, right? It's going to be sold out all the time. And so I think to help build up sort of the hype and the anticipation, I think that was the best move. And like you said, being over the top in Vegas, that just sounds very Vegas-y, right? Like, the only other thing that you can do is maybe have basically scantily clad girls walking them out on that boat.
I'm just disappointed it wasn't at Treasure Island. I wanted to see Roger Goodell in a pirate hat on stage, just like leading up Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Maybe have like a little fake parrot on his like shoulder or something.
You got drafted by the Browns. Time to walk the plank, laddie. That was kind of Irish or Scottish. So one of those two. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a mix of both.
Another Vegas headline, Mark Davis was chatting up Tom Brady. So Tom Brady in Vegas is the new quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders.
I don't think that happens. I think Brady would rather go to LA and be a Charger than Vegas Raider.
You don't think that the Gruden grinder would be able to get Tom Brady in there,
No. I mean, because if you're Tom Brady at this point, right, like if you feel that, hey, I think the Raiders are too far away to win a ring. So if you're going to go somewhere where you're not going to win a ring, you might as well go to LA.
Or the payday. I don't know. Like, what if the Raiders just open up the pocketbooks like, hey, we just got this new stadium. We got all this money. We got all this extra cash flow. Let's get Tom Brady to sell some tickets for us.
I mean, but Tom Brady, we know, is not necessarily motivated by the pay because his wife makes more of the money anyways.
But, I mean, at this point in his career, wouldn't you say that you have your rings? Why not get the pay?
I would agree. Like, if it were me, I'd be like, hey, no, I want my money now, right? Especially if I'm going to be the one bringing in more fans for you, right? If I'm going to be the one pushing tickets for you, I deserve to get paid more. But I just don't know if money is necessarily a factor to Tom Brady. Like I said, their family, they've got hundreds of millions. So
you're right. Maybe Mark Davis was just telling him about his barber, getting Tom Brady a nice bowl cut to match. Yeah, man. Okay. I mean, a lot of good stories. Super Bowl buildup is nigh. Celtics beating Lakers. I just got to throw that in there one more time.
Oh, my gosh.
But real talk, like, comment, definitely subscribe. iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, Big Trust, woo, subscribe button. Peace.